All right, and now we get to the featured bout of the evening in the UFC's welterweight division. You have a hometown hero, so to speak, in the number 5 ranked Gilbert Dorino Burns, who comes into this fight with a record of, I believe, 20-6, right? 20-5. I was off by one. 20-5. He's ranked number 5 in the welterweight division. Former title challenger at welterweight. Recently has wins over the likes of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Lost his most recent fight to Khamzat Chimaev, but it was a back and forth war. Some people thought Burns did enough to win that fight. He hurt Chimaev. He dropped Chimaev. Chimaev dropped him. But it was a back and forth battle. And he's going up against the number 12 ranked streaking contender in Neil the Haitian Sensation Magny, who comes back with a record of 27 victories and 10 defeats. This is a great fight. It's very interesting. You know, I know a lot of people, it's kind of like, I feel like this is a good narrative, or this is the narrative for a lot of fights on this card, is that one person is just going to bum rush and berserk the other fighter. And I feel like a lot of people aren't giving Neil Magny the credit that he deserves for how well-rounded of a fighter he is. And not only that, but how much his range and distance management, especially behind his jab and orthodox, can give problems to a guy like Gilbert Burns. 27-10, 20-5. Burns coming off the loss via decision to Chimaev. And then Neil Magny is coming off of that third-round submission victory over Daniel D-Rod Rodriguez in a fight where I picked against him. I thought for sure Magny was going to have some success, but I did not think he was going to get the job done at all. And not only did he beat Daniel Rodriguez, but he finished him, showcasing his grappling, his wrestling, his ability to use top control and pressure, and eventually locked up that Darce choke standing and brought him down to the ground and submitted him. But his wrestling, his takedowns in that fight, his top control, you know, he really showcased how good his wrestling can be. And when it comes to Neil Magny, that's something we don't really see much from him. A lot of the times it's using his length, using his reach, using the gifts that God gave him by being able to keep opponents at a distance and use that crisp jab, double the jab, triple the jab, pop the 1-2. Magny's always been a volume guy. He's not a really heavy power striker. He doesn't have a lot of power. If he finishes you or if he hurts you, it's due to his volume. But Magny has good wins. I mean, the submission victory over Daniel Rodriguez. He's got a decision win over Jeff Hands of Steel Neal, who just finished Vicente Luque. You know, he doesn't lose very often. His last loss came via second-round submission to Shavkat Rakhmonov. He got submitted with a guillotine choke, got out-wrestled, got out-grappled, got controlled for the entirety of the fight. I think he landed a few shots early on, but other than that, it was the Rakhmonov show, and now Rakhmonov's going to go up against Jeff Neal at UFC 285. Look, Gilbert Burns is definitely the more well-rounded fighter. Gilbert Burns definitely has the bigger power. He's definitely the more capable grappler. He's got much better wrestling and jiu-jitsu. He's basically better everywhere, but the thing that's going to give him problems is the jab of Neil Magny, the straight right hand of Neil Magny, and the ability to use his reach and distance to keep Burns at the end of his strikes. And that's going to give Gilbert Burns trouble. I'm sorry. I know people think that Burns is going to come in here and absolutely obliterate Neil Magny. Could I see it happening? Yes, I could. But as long as this fight stays at striking range, if Magny can keep Burns behind the jab, if he can pop those right hands behind it, double up the jab, triple up the jab, land the 1-2, land the hook behind the cross, and really just get the volume on Gilbert Burns, I think that he's going to have a lot of success in this fight, and a lot more success than people are giving Magny credit for. It's going to be hard for Burns to really beat a guy like Magny on the feet unless he slips those big jabs, comes over the top with the right hand, you know, slips the right hand and is able to counter with the left hook. Their overhand right and the left hook are going to be the best weapons for Gilbert Burns on the feet. When it comes to Magny, the best weapons for him are volume, punches and bunches, and using the jab to dictate the range and pace that the fight is fought at. We've seen Burns have trouble with jabs in the past. He got dropped with a jab from southpaw 2 times, once against the former champion in Kamaru Usman. He was getting pieced up with the jab from orthodox all night, but the southpaw jab is what eventually dropped him and led to the finish. And then against Khamzat Chimaev, the only time he got dropped in that fight was when Chimaev switched to southpaw and popped him with a southpaw jab. I think we're going to see Magny use the southpaw stance a lot. I think we may see him switch stances back and forth and try to exploit that weakness that Burns has for the jab, but more importantly, the jab from the southpaw stance. I actually did a breakdown on Burns' lack of defense and trouble with the southpaw jab. If you check out my YouTube channel, which is the same name as the podcast, or check out my TikTok, which is at Touch 'em Up Podcast, you can see how I broke it down and how, he really has trouble with the jab, especially when it comes from southpaw. I think he's so used to fighting orthodox fighters and being able to slip inside the jab and come over the top with the overhand right, or slip outside the jab and be able to come through with a left hook like he did against Damian Maia, which led to the drop in the finish for him, which put him on this collision course to the welterweight title. But Burns really is a well-rounded guy, and for having some trouble at 155 and being a guy that got knocked out by Dan Hooker at 155, he fought Mike Davis down at 155 pounds, who I actually did a video interview with. If you go and check that out on my YouTube channel, I believe he beat Mike Davis via decision. I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure it was a decision. But, this is a tough fight for Magny it's a tough fight for Burns on the feet, a lot tougher than people are thinking, but it's going to be a very, very rough night for Magny if Burns uses his wrestling and his takedowns, and I honestly think that's what we're going to see here. I could see Magny getting caught on the feet and getting hurt and knocked out, but Magny's not really a guy who gets finished. I believe the only guy to ever knock out Neil Magny was Santiago Ponzinibbio back in like 2015 or 2016. He landed a jab to the body and came over the top with the right hand and knocked out Neil Magny as Magny was back to the fence and he face planted. That was actually the last fight that Ponzinibbio had before he went on that injury hiatus due to the staph infection and some other things. If you want to learn a little bit about Ponzinibbio's trials and tribulations and why he had to step away from MMA for so long, actually go and check out the first interview I did on this podcast with Haider Hassan from The Ultimate Fighter, who was a teammate of Ponzinibbio at American Top Team, and you can learn a little bit more. I'll probably put a link to that in the description if you're interested, and I'll also link the interview with Mike Davis. But I think Gilbert Burns is going to use his wrestling here. I think he's going to close the distance, use the jab, use the left hook, use his overhand right whenever Magny tries to throw that jab. I think we're going to see him kind of step in and out of range, really take the pace and pressure, take the foot off the gas early, try to get Magny to overcommit on the jab, pop him with the left hook if he's slipping to the outside, or slip inside the jab and come over the top with the big overhand right, which we've seen Burns knock people out with before. We saw him hurt the former champion in Usman with the overhand right. We saw him drop Damian Maia with the left hook. The overhand right and the left hook are going to be the biggest weapons for Burns on the feet. The jab, the volume striking, the 1-2s from Magny, the straight punches and the volume, that's going to be his best weapon on the feet. But if Burns really wants to make a case and really go out of his way to make a statement in this fight, I expect him to entertain the striking for maybe the first 2 minutes of the fight, and then eventually look to work in the takedowns, in the wrestling, the top control, and look to set up a submission against Neil Magny. We've seen him have trouble with guys in the past who have really good wrestling, really good jiu-jitsu. I mean, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Rafael Dos Anjos, both those guys have submitted Neil Magny. And I think his wrestling has gotten better from an offensive perspective, and I think he's good at defending inside the clinch because of his height and his reach. I think it's going to be a little bit harder for Burns to take him down from inside the clinch, but double legs and single legs, I think, are going to work very well for Burns, and he's a black belt world champion in jiu-jitsu. I think eventually he's going to get the top position, look to land some ground and pound, and lock up a rear naked choke submission. I could see him getting a guillotine. I could see him getting an arm triangle, but I'm going to go with the rear naked choke. I think Magny gives up his back to try to stand up. Burns grabs the neck and chokes him out. So my pick is going to be Gilbert Dorino Burns to defeat Neil the Haitian Sensation Magny via a second round rear naked choke submission. I know a lot of people are expecting this fight to go the distance. I feel like I've heard that a lot this week, that a lot of people are expecting Magny to be durable enough to resist the finishing upside from Dorino and Gilbert Burns. But I think the jiu-jitsu and the wrestling is really going to showcase the inefficiencies in Magny's grappling, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu game. And I just think we've seen it in the past so many times with Magny when he has heavy wrestlers, heavy grapplers, heavy jiu-jitsu artists. He really has a lot of trouble with them. And, like I said, RDA submitted him with an arm triangle. Shavkat Rakhmonov in his most recent fight before the win over Daniel Rodriguez submitted him with an arm and guillotine, but he was out grappling him for the entirety of the fight. And although we've seen good wrestling from Magny on his side in terms of offensive and decent takedown defense at certain points, I just think that Gilbert Burns is going to slice through him like butter when it hits the mat. And I think Gilbert Burns knows that. And that's where he's going to look to entertain his victory, or that's where he's going to look to exploit the path of least resistance to get the victory in his hometown of Brazil, or home country of Brazil. So I think he's going to take him down. I think early the striking will be a little bit competitive. I do think the jab of Magny is going to work early, but I think later on in that first round, going into the second round, Magny's going to get taken down. Burns is going to exploit that, take the mount, land some good shots. Magny's going to give up his back, and Burns is going to submit him with a rear naked choke. So my pick is going to be the number 5 ranked former title challenger in Gilbert Dourinho Burns to defeat the number 12 ranked Neil Magny via second round rear naked choke submission.